Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our final winter webinar of 2022. Today we have with us Ray Archuleta. So hi, Ray. Thanks for agreeing to talk with producers today. My name is Michael Thiele. My job is to help coordinate grazing club events, workshops, tours. And now, I know over the past couple winters here, we've been doing some online webinars. Grazing club events are funded by Ducks Unlimited, and Ducks has supported the Grazing Club initiative now for over 20 years, and they understand that the links between our stewardship of the land and the health of our ecosystems for people and wildlife, and understand the importance of that. I did set up a Grazing Club YouTube channel last winter, and check it out. There's a bunch of good stuff on there, and I'll have this webinar also recorded and posted on the channel. I'll send out an email when I get it uploaded. There will be a chance for questions, so please post your questions in the chat, and then I can, in proper order, present the questions to Ray, and then maybe we can also do sort of a one-on-one question answer too if we have time. So just as a short intro, Ray the soil guy, Archuleta, lives with his family in Seymour, Missouri on a sheep ranch. Ray is also a teacher in, I think the true sense of education and deeper understanding. He's also famous in the documentary Kiss the Ground. Check that out on Netflix. And I hear there may be another one on the way there, Ray. Is that true?
Yep. It is. It's going to be called Common Ground, I guess. I don't know. And they might change it. Who knows?
Okay. I like that. And he's also, a bit of a performer and entertainer. It's nice to mix the two with the education component. And anyone who's seen him conduct his soil demonstration, slake test and all that, will know what I mean. I've been fortunate to work and get to know Ray. So appreciate him being here today. And, and I really appreciate his commitment to agriculture and soil health. And that's inspired my own work and helped increase my own understanding. So today, Ray's going to talk a little bit of regenerative ag, and then also talk about some work that he's done and research that's been published with David Montgomery and the Brown Ranch to compare regenerative and conventional farms, things like organic matter and soil health and the nutrient density of the food produced. The title of the paper is Soil Health and Nutrient Density, Preliminary Comparison of Regenerative and Conventional Farming. So with that, Ray, I'll let you get started.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Michael. I wish that, how long have I known you, Michael? It's been how many years now?
Yeah, it's been a bunch, yeah.
Yeah, we're getting older all the time, but Mike, I want to thank you for what you do. You know what? You always need a catalyst in the local community, and thank you for being that, Mike. At the end of the day, you can go to different regions, you can go to different areas to go teach, but there has to always be vehicles of community, and I appreciate that you do that. You're that conduit, Michael, and that love for the land. So I appreciate that. And I want to say good afternoon to all of you. It's good to my northern brothers. I'm so glad that I'm hoping winter will slowly dissipate for you guys. I tell everybody I'm a warm season cover crop. I would die up there. So there's a reason why I live in southern Missouri, because I don't have such harsh winters. So let me start off, guys. Now and the title of this is going to start off. I have this title slide here, and there's a reason for it, because I think this is really, really critical. And I think, and I love this title. It's called Regenerative Agriculture, the Butterfly Effect that will change the world. And I'm going to explain the butterfly effect in just a second, and how the tiny details of what the natural system does every day and the tiny details that happens to our lives. And that's where that concept, the butterfly effect, and I'll explain that to you. And I think that new science, but like Michael said, this paper, the credit goes to Ann and David Montgomery. I'm the one that just went out and collected soils, and it was like, again, a soil health and nutrient density, a preliminary comparison of a comparison. Notice a comparison of regenerative and conventional farming. It was not statistically, we didn't have enough samples to do it statistically, but it was like a pair of watershed, like you're doing a study, and it got accepted in a peer review. And what it consisted of is, if you look at this, it was various parts of the whole country where we went, and I actually drove to each spot, or in the last one, California, I actually flew, but I actually drove to to the majority of these sites, what you see. And what we did is we took, and each of those numbers represent a paired farm study, where we took a conventional farm and a regenerative farm, and we took the soil samples from there, and the vegetables, or any of the produce, or the wheat, or the dairy product, whatever it was, and then we sent it to a lab and got it analyzed. But before I go deeper into that, let me explain what I was talking about, the butterfly effect, and then you'll see why I'm building this. And because at the theme of this, the theme of my talk really is about, if you think about how the intimate connectedness of things, and that's what quantum physics is teaching us. There's two types of physics. One of the physics that we all know and we've been all very familiar with is the classical physics, where it tells you movements, pace, location. It's kind of the laws of gravity, the things that we can see on a daily basis. That's a classical physics, Newtonian physics. We've all been part of it. We went to school for it, high school, grade school, college. But the one that doesn't get much publicity, but except for some people like Michael Thiele or myself, some geeky people, and some of you guys in the audience, is quantum physics. It's a physics that I think is going to explain a lot of the biology and what's going on. And it talks about particles that are so tiny that can be in numerous places at one time. And these particles can tunnel through obstacles, and they can communicate through large distances. Quantum physics. In fact, this physics just really messed with Einstein's thought process. He goes, because in the normal realm that we see, in the large realm, not the quantum level. Now, when I talk about quantum level, I'm talking about little tiny particles that are even smaller than electrons, called neutrinos, and all these other, the God particles, they call them, where the metaphysical is explained. And Einstein would say about quantum physics, because see, in classical physics, you can see it's very deterministic. It follows laws. But quantum physics also follows laws, except that it's unpredictable. When we talk about chaos, mathematically and physically, it's about unpredictable. It's the science of the unpredictable. And Einstein would say about quantum physics, I don't believe that God plays dice. But we're finding out that both are true. In the quantum level, yes, men can have their freedom will, but yet at the same time, it's very deterministic. And the science that the person that really tied into that, and the reason I'm sharing this, because it leads to my message through that whole thing about how bionutrient density and what we do on the farm is very connected to in this physical realm, this quantum physical realm. I definitely recommend, if you guys are bored up there in these cold winters and you're tired of watching TV, I would definitely recommend this book. It's called Chaos, the New Science, Making a New Science by James Glick. It got the New York Times bestseller. And one of the persons they talked about was Ed Norton Lorenz. Dr. Lorenz in the 1961 came out incredible. He was a meteorologist and a mathematician, and a brilliant mathematician. In fact, he's the one that coined the term the butterfly effect. And what does that mean? The way it goes is, if the flapping of the wings of a butterfly in Brazil, and it moves its wings gently, and it's moving the particles and those air molecules, can that movement of that butterfly create a tornado in Kansas? That is termed the butterfly effect. Now we know that that is true. It does make that kind of difference, that everything is in these biological systems, human-wise, our farms, our ranch, our bodies, anything that's a biological dynamic, complex system is intimately connected. And one initial condition of something changing can have a huge tornado effect somewhere else. So that's where it's called the butterfly effect. And this happens in agriculture all the time. The way it came about was Dr. Lorenz had this very computer model, and that's the way the computer models looked back then. And he had 12 parameters of the weather. And he would run like barometric pressure, temperature, and other various parameters, and it would tell him about the climate. But one day in his lab, the machine went down for some reason. Doesn't really matter what happened, but he went and he said the machine was down. He says, well, look, I'll go grab a cup of coffee, but I'll set my computer model, because he would run the model on 6 decimals. So if he was measuring barometric pressure or temperature, he would run it to 6 decimals. So and this time he ran it with 3 decimals and said, it's not going to make a big difference. It's only 1 parts in 1,000. What would that make a big difference? Whether my model predicted rain or whatever, it shouldn't make a difference at all. But to his shock and astonishment, that 1 part of 1,000th of the measurement changed whether he was going to get rain, he was going to get sun. It shocked him. I says, how can that be? How can one tiny little measurement in natural systems, these dynamic systems, have such a different outcome? And that's where the concept of the butterfly effect had a total different. That's why when you see people making predictions of the weather using sophisticated satellite, and they use sophisticated models, but most people don't realize they have to run tons of models, 10 or 12 models running at the same time, because they really can't figure out exactly what's going to happen. So in the book, James Glick pulls out and makes a mention of what Dr. Lorenz says. If you would put sensors every 1 foot apart, and you would make them as high up into the terrestrial atmosphere beyond Mount Everest, and you brought them all together and you took all the measurements out and all the errors out of the equipment and used super duper quantum computers, you would still not predict the weather, period. In fact, after 7 or 8 days, computer models are worthless. Don't even bother looking at them. They're good for about 1 or 2 days, but other than that, forget it. So it also led to this same old adage that's been used for a long time. Some people give Benjamin Franklin this credit, and it's called chaos. And it's not titled chaos, but it really comes back to this theme of chaos. It's called the sensitive dependence of the initial condition of any biological condition, because it's so intimately connected. This little rhyme does a really good job of explaining it. It says, case in point, it says, for want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For the want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. For want of the rider, the message was lost. For the lack of a message, the battle was lost. And because the battle was lost, the kingdom was lost, all because of the lack of a horseshoe nail. One tiny little initial condition of one little thing determined whether the kingdom was lost or not. Same thing happens in biological systems. The way we farm, the way we ranch really determines whether we're going to have nutrient-dense food, if our animals are going to get better, or we're going to build more carbon. Everything we do, the more we move that fence, move the cattle one more time, not overgraze, the one less tillage you do, the less spraying of Roundup and the chemicals and the fertilizer, and you start becoming way much more astute to those tiny initial conditions of your natural system. The change can be amazing. Case in point, look at this in Coffee County. On the left, you see here, this has been no-till for many, many years. There's an area that gets about 50, 55 inches of rain. This is no-till, folks. One of the principles of soil health. Look at how crappy it looks, stratified. You can see little anaerobic conditions. This is not good, healthy soil. One change of that initial condition and changing it to cover crops, 3 years of covers, religious cover crops, rolling them tall, rolling them down and letting them grow 6 feet tall. And look how it changed. That little tiny thing of cover crops made that huge impact in that whole biological system. 279% increase in respiration, 39% increase in nutrient cycling, more carbon being consumed, and the soil health scores changed by 50%. Adam Daugherty told me that one of his farmers consistently, discreetly came to him and said, you know, Adam says, we've done this. I have one field that had over 300 bushel, 270 bushel consistently to the field because he went to cover crops. That made a huge difference. That one tiny thing as a cover crop had that significant impact. Okay, back to this paired watershed study, like I said, sometimes we ask people, well, if it's not replicable, if we dismissed it. And I try to remind people that science is observation. It's the beginning stages of observation. Just because you don't run a statistical analysis doesn't mean it's not so. Sometimes professors, I've heard PhDs, people down here talk to farmers like, well, if it's not replicated, it's anecdotal. And I almost want to say, well, if there's not 2 or 3 of you, you're anecdotal. So the thing is, we can be great observers. And here's a great example. When I go talk to producers, first thing I do is I pick a shovel and I'll go to the edges of the fence or their forested area that hasn't been farmed, and I'll look at their field. That's what we did in that study. We did the same thing. We took one farm that's farmed organically or conventionally, excessive tillage, and then another one that's more regenerative with less of the chemicals and fertilizers and more mimicking nature. You can see this example happen everywhere. This is why I use this as a very powerful tool, because sometimes I may only have 5 or 10 minutes to get my point across with a producer. A shovel is a great way of the way we typically farm and how the natural system farms. So same thing again. It really makes a difference how we do business. It really impacts that natural dynamic system. So what we do, those tiny things make a huge impact. And the way we graze. A lot of times, every time, what's one of the things that we have is, as I travel this whole country, we see a lot of continuous grazing. They keep the animals set stock, keep them in one area, come and see them for a week or 2. Cows do whatever they want. But then when they go to a regenerative system, when they start moving the cows more frequently, give more recovery time, look at the difference in infiltration rates. Look at the aggregation. Makes a huge difference in how we do business. But we have been accustomed that we have a lot of producers, but we have very few farmers. I call a farmer who understands his ecological context, farms and mimics nature, great observer. I have become a prescriptive agronomist. When I left college, I was a prescriptive agronomist. I thought that was the nutrient cycle. That is not the nutrient cycle, folks. This is the nutrient cycle. The reason I'm showing you these pictures is because every one of those organisms serve a purpose and can determine how our nutrient dense our food becomes. And you'll see this paper as we go through it, that it does make a fact. It does make an impact. All of those creatures are interconnected, just like quantum physics is telling us. Everything is one. Everything is connected. So the way we farm and the way we ranch has a huge, huge impact on how we do business. I love this little video, and you've seen it before because I've shown it, but oops, it's gone. But here is supposed to be a little video where you see the earthworms and they're bringing this down, they're breaking all these little, and so the thing, it got corrupted, my little video, but here's what I wanted to say about that, is that that upper 1 inch of the soil, 2 inches, is so critical. 70% of all insects make their habitat right here on that top surface. So it's really important to understand that that skin on the top of the surface, 30 to 35% of that makes organic matter. Most of it comes from the root, but all these critters add to the biological awesomeness and the nutrient density of our food. Please keep in mind that all of us, Canada, what I have in common with you up in Canada is this: geology, sand, silt, and clay. But what may be different is right here. It's these super biotic blues. We now have the technology to measure those super molecules. And you'll find that some of these molecules are not only come from the death and life of these organisms, but it also are the processes, these organisms, these fungi, all of them add to our health. That these molecules not only go to the plants for their health, but it reaches the animal and it reaches the human. So geology with life, the byproducts of life and death, makes soil. We have to understand that. It's very, very critical to understand that concept. So without that framework that I set for you, now we can start talking about how this is so critical for our lives, for the lives of not just ourselves, for our children, and for generation to generation. This is an incredibly cool mantra. Let thy food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food. This is so critical, especially now that chronic disease and cancer, and my wife, she suffers with Hashimoto, and this are becoming more and more prevalent. And I'm seeing younger and younger generations becoming more obese, more sickly. It's because we're working against the creation, the design that the creator did, the way he did it, business for us. The system was designed to be healthy for us. And so one of the things I recommend, so we start this journey, is I definitely recommend that book, Soil Microorganisms and Higher Plants. I was told about that book about 10 years ago, maybe 13, 14 years ago, and I read it twice. It's called Soil Microorganisms and Higher Plants by N.A. Krasil'nikov. The Russians were so far ahead of us. And the reason I'm sharing this book with you, because I want to show you 2 or 3 slides, because, you know, we have now very sophisticated technology, but yet some of these scientists way back, and this was published in 1961, but it was really in the 1930s, 40s, the Russians were way ahead of us, way ahead of us. And so I definitely recommend that book. You'll find it on Amazon for like 10 or 12 bucks. Definitely worth getting. One of my favorite books. In some of the book, they did some experiment on duckweed. And the reason I like that is duckweed is an aquatic plant. And what they did is they applied that control. They count the species, the dry weight. They added manure. The ash of manure, peat composed with bacteria, ash of compost, soil humus, and burned soil. What is the common pattern where you saw the greatest number of species? Isn't it interesting? The control was 750 number of species, but look at the manure, it had the highest. Why was manure so high? Now, if you got rid of all the organic molecules involved with manure, all the bacteria, all the organisms, everything attached that's not organic, but made it, and what they did is they burned the manure up and just got the ash of it. It did slightly better than the control. But notice how the manure differs when you had an organic molecule attached. So when I say the word organic, there's a carbon molecule still attached to it. You need to understand a carbon molecule still attached to that substance, to that. So when somebody says it's organic nitrogen, there's a carbon molecule still attached to that. And look at the peat composed with bacteria. Still was pretty high, but still not as good as the manure. Same as soil humus. You would think, well, don't we all rate ourselves by the humus in the soil? But nothing. That's why you can imagine why cow manure and people that integrate cows in their operation is so phenomenal. And then burn soil, where they just burned it and just had the inorganic nutrients and burned every organic substance from it, it did worse than the control. Fascinating. Again, here's another part where they show here where back now, look at the dates, 1939, and where they were showing compares the effect of manure and mineral fertilizers on vitamin B1 content of wheat and barley tissue. They did this in the 30s, Notice with fertilizer, without fertilizer, the control, and then this was made the nanograms per 1 gram of plant mass. This is what the unit you see here. Again, look what did the best of all of them, the manure. And even if you put fertilizer, it still, in the barley, responded better to the manure than manure and chemical fertilizer. So the wheat had the same response, but it's really neat to see how critical those biological molecules are in this whole thing. It's those tiny little things, that butterfly effect of what those microbes do, those subtle things, they can get a tornado of nutrition up to the plant and to the human. Again, composting manure, improving yield and vitamin content. Again, mineral fertilization. You can see this in sugar beets. And then you can see the content and the yield. But look what happens when manure is added into this whole equation. It makes a huge difference in the outcome. Same thing here with growing potatoes. Mineral fertilization by themselves, mineral fertilization with manure. That's a significant amount. Makes a big difference. So same thing here. So going back to the paired watershed study, now that I set the foundation here. So what we did is we went to these farms, and each farm, we got a regenerative and another farm comparative, same soils, very close by, that are more conventional and there are some organic farms, and I'll explain that in a second. Okay, so we went all over, and then if you read the paper, we went from California, this was an organic farm in San Vestol, and then one up in Lebanon, Connecticut. Those were both organic no-till. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, here is some of the preliminary findings. Let me explain what we're looking at here. The R stands for regenerative. This is the percent organic matter. This is the Haney score. Okay. And then here is the conventional, so organic matter and the Haney score. This one was again, organic no-till vegetable farm, 3 acres on Brian O'Hara's. He makes $315,000 on 3 acres. So he makes $100,000 on each acre growing leafy vegetables and vegetables. He's got an impressive place, and he uses Korean farming and no-till vegetables, by the way. His organic matter was 11%. His conventional neighbor growing vegetables organically, well, conventionally, I'm sorry, that one was a conventional farm, was 3% organic matter. And this numbers here is taking the ratio of the regenerative divided by the conventional, and it was 3 to 4 times more of the soil organic measure ratio and the soil health score. Look how much higher it was. This was a no-till farm. This was North Carolina. This was Russell Hidrick's farm. His soil score was 18.2. The Haney score was 3.4. By the way, him and that conventional farmer this was conventional tillage. This no-till farm in Hickory, North Carolina had the lowest score, and it was no-till. A lot of fertilizer, a lot of chemicals. Then we went to Manchester, Tennessee, soil health score of 23. You can read that in Waverly. And then Gabe Brown's organic matter of 7%. In the organic farm that grows peas was 3%. The Gabe's score was 20. The neighbor soil health score was 8. Now, to give you kind of a benchmark, soil health score of 7 and below, it's not good, folks. Not good. I like to see soil health scores of no-till and covers up in the upper teens. That's where I like to see them. I've seen soil health scores of 30s, 40s on guys that are integrating animals, cover crops, and no-till. And so just to give you a point of reference, I like to see 7 and above. This was done in peas in the farm that was regenerative, and the non-regenerative farm. That give you the difference in the two scores and the ratios. And then this farm was very interesting because they both farm very similarly, but they're in California. Soil health score, looking at the organic matter, was 11% on that farm. The conventional organic farm, not very far from his farm, lot of tillage, was 2.1. Soil health score was 8.1. So you can kind of see a pattern where on a national scale, the Haney test was able to delineate some of these type of management practices. Go to the next one. And again, you can see that the regenerative farms, the range of organic matter was a lot higher versus the conventional systems. And part of there was about 3 organic systems that I call them in the conventional system, because the reason we kind of grouped them in the conventional, when you're using the tools out of control, and Gabe and I, we don't favor organic or no-till or anything, because it's never about no-till. It's never about organic. It's not about it's not about cover crops. It's not about the cows. Those are all tools. We're all about the understanding of the producer. And so if there was overuse of the tools, that's a conventional thought process. There's a conventional organic. Just because you don't use chemicals and fertilizer, but yet some of the most destroyed farms, as you can see, are in conventional farms, and even in organic farms. Look at the Haney scores, the difference. Look at the soil organic matter and the ratios, how they made a huge difference. It made a huge impact in the way you farm. The soil would speak to us, and the Haney test was really good because it's so sensitive. It has the ability to pick that up. Again, you can see the ratios, how they break out the regenerative versus the conventional. You can see that in this graph. Same thing in the soil organic matter, and where the conventional kind of lumped on the lower levels, and the high ratios were up for the regenerative farms. So let's see, hold on a second. Okay, now skip here, I apologize. Now let's talk about some of the results. In the pork, this was some of the results that came out. And it was very interesting in the regenerative, and these are all the molecules that were measured, the phytonutrients that we hardly ever talk about. For many, many years in the food realm, and we talked about phosphorus, trace minerals. That's the science that we had. That's the only thing that we could put our hat on. We could say this one had more zinc, this had more phosphorus. With now the sophisticated technology that we have, we're able to measure these organic molecules inside the meat. And each of these molecules are important for health. And you can see in the regional group they went to the local grocery store, and they were grass-fed, or they got it from the regional area, versus regen ag, that some of you guys are doing, no-till cover crops and integrating the animals. I call them more regenerative farmers, cutting way back on the inputs. And then there was the conventional type farming systems. And you can see in each of these molecules that you could see the difference, and that the regen ag always rated higher consistently. Here, the non-GMO, this one was the regional health promoting brand. It went into a local grocery store, and they picked the meat and they sent it to the lab. And that's what some of the values that you can see. And we'll talk about what some of those values mean in a little while. Same thing with the beef fatty acid comparison, the alpha and all these trace omega-3s. We know that omega-3 and omega-6 ratios are incredibly important. And you can see in the regen and the regional meat and the conventional, again, the regenerative farmers are higher in values than even the grass-fed from the regional area. I don't know where they got it and where they got that from, but like again, they went to a local grocery store, picked a brand that was grass-fed and it was non-GMO. And you can see still in the pork and the beef fatty acids, you can see this the differences in the numbers. So what does this mean? Look, so in regen beef, the omegas 3 and 6 complexes were 3 times higher. We know that if you talk to people that are into health and holistic practitioners, they always talk about how ALA is very important for reducing cardiac issues with heart, inflammation in the body. A lot of times, Americans are dealing with a lot of inflammation, and a lot of it's due from our feedlot beef, the way we fatten these animals at the end. Also too much sugar, too much processed food, all mess up and create this inflammations. But for many years, in fact, I can still, when I go visit my mom and dad are in their 80s. My dad has heart issues, he's got stents, and he's also got COPD, but my mom insists of feeding him lean meat. And I said, Mom, you need the fats. Fats are good. I was growing up in a home at that time where we went from lard to vegetable oil. And from that point on, when we got away from animal fat, you can see a picture there was a picture of a beach in the 1960s. You would hardly see anybody that's obese in the beach. Snapshot, boom, nobody was obese. Now, you take a snapshot, a good percentage of Americans are obese. And a lot of it is back to this omega-3, omega-6 complexes. It's the processed food and how we, in a pork, the way we do our, and again, you can see in the regen pork was 9 times omega-3s and the 6 and all the LAs and all these good stuff that our bodies need. But we got away completely from it. Again, we went into this processed world that this kind of breaking up of the American family where people, there's single home families. I mean, it used to be somebody would stay back at the house. Now both are working, and then fast food became a big issue, and the whole society changed in the turn of that century, in the 1960s. I can remember that very vividly. Why should we care? Well, we should care because it's those butterfly effects of what you do on that place, on your operation, can have a huge effect on people's lives and their quality and what they get. And I personally think in our country, and this is my humble opinion, that in the United States, I speak for the United States, that I read an article one time, and I think I'm beginning to get more and more appreciation now being in the regenerative ag movement, that I have more and more appreciation about food. And I'll never forget what somebody said: a piece of food should be so delicious, so nutritious. Those are linked together. That if you invite your family members who you dislike, but if the food is so good and nutritious, you might even forgive them. That says a lot about how important a meal is. If you go to France, if you go to other parts of the world, sitting a meal and having it together, it's not just like eating at a CAFO. If you watch animals, they sit there and they eat in this competition, you eat and you feel a meal and the way it's treated and the way the food is treated and all the, and there's really no consciousness of how much work and how much grace and how much miracle it took to get that food there. And to show that in a empirical way is you can see these molecules that you're talking about, like this, the CLAs and this diet, all this stuff is very connected to chronic disease and why we're having so much problems. And again, it's back to those little critters in the soil and how we do business makes an impact. Now, look at this here. There's huge evidence that implicates high omega-6 to 3 ratios, and our typical Western diet is causing inflammation, obesity, cardiovascular, irritable bowel disease, Alzheimer's, all coming back to weigh these tiny ratios. Does those tiny things make a difference? Absolutely. Same thing. And that's also the effect of Crohn's disease and arthritis. This is very well documented, and this was documented in this paper. One thing that David does and his wife Anne, they do a really good job of going into the research. Their new book coming out, I think the book's titled "Your Food, What Your Food Eats." You are what your food eats, or something like that. And it's going to come out. It'll be out in June. I would definitely buy that book. Again, the results of all that pair studies on each of those farms, the results showed that the regenerative had 34% more vitamin K and 15% more vitamin E. And you can read that yourself. And again, more copper, more calcium, more zinc. It just shows that in general, and again, because of the complexity and that a majority of the farms, the regenerative farms, did better in all on the majority of the categories. And again, now the discussion part is using, when his discussion at the end of the paper, and he brought this up, this was David's points. He says that using no-till cover crops and diversity, and I would add the animals, increased organic matter by double. On average of all of them have doubled, and yet the national soils, the national organic matter throughout our country is going down. But while the regenerative farms are doubling their organic matter on the national, on the average. And the soil health scores were on the average higher and better. And that indicates better cycling, better functioning soils. The no-till organic veggie farms had 2 or 3 times more organic matter than the conventional ones. And he also made a comment, it was easier to increase organic matter, and scale does make a difference. That on a smaller farm, you have the ability to manage better. I don't know who made this comment. I don't know if it was a credit to Masanobu Fukuoka. It says, the fertility of the farm is in proportion to the number of footsteps you take on it. So the smaller the farm, the more detailed you can pay attention to the details. The North Dakota regenerative had higher organic matter on deeper depths. Of all the farms, Gabe's had deeper soil organic matter than rest of the others. A lot of the organic matter maybe in the first 6 or 12 inches, Gabe had it on deeper levels. Also, the paper indicates that regenerative farms increase in wheat nutrient density is a historical decline, but the regenerative ones were really high comparison to the historical conditions of the wheat grown in this country today. Okay. Again, we talked about that already. And then the interesting last comment here was that the fatty acid profile was higher and typically in grass-fed than conventionally raised. And a large body of research has shown that. And so if you want to look at the research behind that, that's the nice thing about this paper. You can go look it for yourself. Now, I rarely, I don't like, and this slide, forgive me for it, I do not like lots of words, lots of in a slide. I'm breaking the rules of PowerPoint. Don't beat me up too bad in your mind. But I'm going to read this last comment because I think this really says a lot. And if you really look at some of the major theme of this paper, it says it appears that healthier soil with more soil organic matter and the life it sustains enhance the nutrient density of crops, increasing the level of micronutrients, photochemicals. Though we suspect influencing cycling as biochemical signaling, that means the microbes communicating, involved in photochemical production. These results parallel those obtained from biofortification of mineral density through the use of micronutrient fertilizer and growth promoting bacteria inoculation, advocated as ways to help address mineral nutrient deficiencies in the human diet. Interesting. Some of these producers did this with just plants and cows. I keep telling people, the soil only wants 3 things from you. 1, to have a relationship and to understand it. And it wants plants, and it wants cows. Number 4, it's stop beating it up with all your tools. It's pretty simple. Conclusion of the paper, given the complexity of soil ecology, the human microbe and other important factors, it would be more challenging to be more rigorously link soil health and human health. David made it very, very clear on the beginning of the paper. This is not replicated. You have to go more vigorously and spend a lot of money into this. A lot of money was spent to do this. It cost a lot of money to do this, even this simple paired comparison. It would involve huge amounts of money down the road. But still, he says, our preliminary, notice how the word he used, preliminary, comparison suggests the potential for regenerative agriculture practice to build soil health, to enhance the nutritional profile of crops and livestock, and thereby influence human health and the risk of chronic disease. And I said, David, have you had any blowback because of this paper? And he says, some of the people in the organic were kind of upset with him. And I said, look, it's not about organic. It never was about organic. It's not about no-till. It was never about that. It's about having a regenerative thought process of working with the natural system. It's about a thought process that knows that the plant and soil are one. If you look at the whole common theme of all of it, what was the most common thing of all of those paired watersheds? Those who had living roots, I love this video, that are capturing sun and using the animals and facilitating life, scored better, the food was healthier, the animal was healthier, and we become the most limiting nutrient of all for the soils all over the globe is this, folks, right here. Carbon. Carbon feeds these guys they're the ones that make all these nutrients available. Notice there's a bacteria that makes iron, manganese, chromium. These critters with the fungi and the living roots, carbon is the most limiting. So when I go across the country, guess what? If you got on a vehicle and drove from California, you guys came from Canada and come to visit me, this is what you would see coming from north to south. Bare fields. This is Pennsylvania, same time. Why isn't our country green? Why? Again, this is the problem right here. We do too much tillage. We hay too much. We spray too much. We over fertilize. We have poor rotations, too many legumes in the rotation. All these impact the biology. It's the frequency of the disturbance. How frequent do you do that? Now, did I say not to use these tools? Did not say that at all. But the more frequent you use the tools, you spray, and the more frequent you do, and the more intense your tillage and your disturbances, the more you impact the biology. And the scale of your disturbance. The current way people do pest management now is, if they have an outbreak in one field, they'll tell the co-op to go spray the rest of the field, and then the neighbors find out and they spray the whole thing. And they didn't need to do that. And then the timing of your disturbances. Because that mycorrhizae picking up those key nutrients, which sustains springtails and affects all this connectedness, then the system collapses. Then you buy more nutrients, you buy more fertilizer, you're in this treadmill, and then our food and these organisms are not able to provide the nutrient density and provide those key phytochemicals and those molecules, and because they're not doing that. This is a video of showing no-till with cover crops and grazing. This is Michael Thompson in Canada, in Kansas. Look at this life. Without that life, we're not going to pick up those phytochemicals, those nutrients, all that B vitamins like the Russians knew. Now look at no-till with lots of chemicals. You guys see any life there? Where's the protozoa? Where's the nematodes? Where's the life? You might see a scant amount of bacteria running back and forth. Again, so that we don't forget, look at the difference. No-till, cover crops, grazing. So, wrapping it up, the last slide. The conclusion of the matter, the biggest obstacle, the biggest problem is the human mind. like Alejandro told his rancher, one buddy told him one day, he came up to him and he was late at night. I'll never forget Alejandro Carrillo's in Mexico, and it's late. His ranch is isolated in the middle of nowhere. It's 40 miles off the paved road. And you can see a car travel for many, many miles. And it was his neighbor. And he says, Alejandro, I have something to talk to you about. He tells Alejandro's telling the story in his wonderful, soft voice. And he says, Alejandro, I have something to pick on you. He goes, what's wrong, neighbor? He says, you don't vaccinate your cows, and my cows are dying. I think you're the problem. And then Alejandro, in his very calm demeanor, says, really, neighbor? I said, I think I know what your problem is. Why don't you get in your pickup, go to her house, and then go to the bathroom and look in the mirror? You're the problem. And his rancher took off, pissed off. But 2 months later, he comes back and goes, Alejandro, you're right. I wasn't feeding my animals enough. A lot of times, guys, we're blinded to our own social conditioning. We need to understand, I was indoctrinated in university. I was indoctrinated in my schools. I was indoctrinated in my church, in my community, with the people you hang around with. We get indoctrinated. We go through what we call social conditioning. It is a very common thing that happens. So what it takes to break that, a lot of us, I had an epiphany 15 years ago, 16, 17 years ago. I had a shift of mindset. I had to go through a complete different mindset. I'll leave you with this last thought, and I'll read this title of Regenerative Agriculture. I would tell you, when I was 42 years old, working in NRCS, and I was living in Idaho, and I was responsible for Oregon. I was a district conservationist. I started to hate agriculture. Got very depressed because I saw no change. We were spending billions of dollars. The water was not getting cleaned up. And I could see that young farmers couldn't come into the operation. I started to hate agriculture. Now I have hope. I know the answer. The goal is very simple, ladies and gentlemen. Emulate, mimic nature, her design, her patterns, and the way she works. I'd rather be well-read than well-educated. Very few are well-educated and well-read. What do I mean by well-read? Reading the right books that gives you the right framework. That's why when I got to meet Alan Savory, and his book actually changed my life in going to Gabe's. That really made a huge difference. This is my definition of regenerative agriculture. There's many out there. To me, regenerative agriculture is this: regeneration. It's a continuous journey that promotes life. It's continuous. For the rest of your life, you will be doing it. It is a renewal of the human heart and mind. Unless your mind changes in heart and the way you look at the system, your farm will not change. You do not understand that the soil is alive, it will not change. It's a framework of thinking that nurtures and emulates nature's intelligent design. That's what I think it is. So I wrap that up. So I want to open up to questions and answers. I hope that, but that was my little spiel of what Michael asked me. And
Right.
if you didn't like it, my name is Michael Thompson. No, as Michael Teeley. I'm sorry. Go ahead, guys. Questions.
Don't have anything in the chat yet. It's a pretty quiet group, but your last slide reminded me of something I just read this morning. Actually, I was reading an old book by Gregory Bateson. If you know that name, Dr. Bateson. He's one of the original ecologists and systems thinkers, and kind of in the old tradition of kind of like, these gentleman biologist type. He was everything, anthropologist. Anyways, he has this wonderful quote: the major problems in the world are the result of the difference between how nature works and the way people think. Yeah. I thought that was quite profound, right? And then how we want the world to work and how it actually works are sometimes two different things. And when we can, figure out a way to make those two work, basically what you're, mimic nature, understand more deeply.
It takes humility, Mike. It takes humility. I think one of the things I was humbled in my early 40s. Went to 8 years of university, and it was humbling not to know how to look at the problem. and I was the problem in how I looked at it. So regenerative ag is a journey of humility. I think a lot of people that got into this was because they were suffering. They were failing. Things weren't working. They were observing. They were starting to notice something was wrong. And some people just had good mentors. I didn't have good mentors. I mean, I didn't have one person tell me, Ray, look in my eyes, focus, like the way my wife talks to me. Your goal is to emulate nature. That's the goal. It's not no-till. It's not cover crops, et cetera, et cetera. So let's open it up to the group. Questions, guys? Yeah, buts and all that, and discussion. And
If you want to unmute and ask the question to Ray, that's fine too.
yeah, just ask it. We're a small group. Oh, everybody must have fallen asleep on that one.
I don't think so. They're just give them a minute.
They're shy. Can't be. Canadians aren't shy. I guess they are.
We actually have more people coming in here. I think we have a few from Saskatchewan coming in. They're an hour behind, and I think that's
Yeah.
Oh.
Hi, this is Ralph
Hey,
Parker
Ralph.
calling. Ray, good to see you again.
Bless you.
I'm on Saskatchewan time. I guess I'm an hour late, so I missed the presentation, but I know it was good. It's just great to see the regenerative ag still kicking in hard, and you're teaching people about the soil biology is so important.
Oh, yes, Ralph. It's so exciting. I tell you what, it was so neat. I was just telling Michael, Ralph, that I just got off a Zoom meeting with a university in Mexico, and how they're using the slate test, and how I think they're catching on so much quicker. I think it was so neat to see some professors there that not only well educated, but they were humble to learn, and they saw that movie Kiss the Ground. That movie Kiss the Ground. Oh my gosh, it changed a lot of people's perception of regenerative agriculture, and it's it's all over the board depending on whose filters they were looking at. But most people don't realize that the movie that Kiss the Ground movie, Ralph, was it was done 7 years ago, Ralph. 7 years ago. And I'm glad it came out late, Michael, because I would have been fired again or got in trouble. Yep. Because you're supposed to ask permission to be on the films. You got to ask permission because they don't want to be embarrassed, I guess.
When you were still with NRCS with the government.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Right. Yeah.
I retired in 2016. That documentary is 7 years old. It took that long because they trying to get the money. And the first time they got the money, I told Josh and Rebecca, I said, if you're going to make this an organic vegan movie, I don't want to be on it. That's not what this is about. This is regenerative agriculture. I said, but I got to give Josh and Rebecca credit because they had a lot of pressure to keep that movie. There's a saying, Ralph, he who has the gold makes the rules. So whoever funds the documentary, you can kind of slant it to whatever you want to favor, right? But I got to give Josh and Rebecca credit because as they were going down this journey, they realized that maybe the organic system is flawed also. And then I said, Josh, I only want a couple of things from that movie. One, give animals the glory they deserve for healing the land. And number two is leave people with hope. Give them hope. Because I hate watching environmental movies because they're environmental documentaries because they're so depressing. They don't give people hope that we can fix this. We can fix this. And so it did that. So thank you for coming on, Ralph.
Yeah.
It definitely did leave you with a sense of hope, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I did.
I thought it was a wonderful documentary.
Yeah, and Ralph, you'll be able to pick the recording up, even though you missed it.
Yep.
Mike recorded it.
Yep.
And so.
That's crazy because I missed the meeting. I'm like,
oh, we have a question here, Ray. We are trying to regeneratively graze our cattle. I'm really struggling on how to regeneratively sustain our cattle through our long winters here. You may not be the.
Well, here's the thing, Kevin. Look, here I live in further south, and people are still haying. And Kevin, people are still haying here. And this far south, you should be able to graze all year around without haying. Look, I've been on this farm 4 years. No, I bought it in 2016. This is going to be the first year that I'm going to have all the infrastructure, everything set up that I can graze. So I do things backwards, Kevin. I went and bought the sheep, and it was a cattle farm, and there was a 5-strand barbed wire. So I wasn't even prepared. So I lost 2 of my rams because they left through the fence. I did everything. So I had to put woven wire all completely around. It took me 2 years. Then I had serious mistakes. Like I was told by alpacas are good for sheep. And keep in mind, my neighbor said, Ray, this is cattle country. This is not sheep country. So I had the neighbors tell me you're an idiot. And so we lost using donkeys, alpacas. We lost our butt. Sheep. The predators would just keep eating them. And I went to guard dogs. So the whole purpose I'm bringing that up is I went through a journey. I didn't give up. And I knew that I was failing. I have some paddocks that are overgrazed. I killed some sheep because they got worms. I did every possible mistake that you can think of. Now up there, we think, because one of the things that I really appreciated about North Dakota, what they did, Kevin, there's a rancher, and his name is, Michael, do you remember him? Is the one that's very similar like Gabe. What he does, he plants 300 acres of cover crop mixes, and they're about 10 or 11 feet tall. And he stockpiles that, and he grazes that during the winter. And North Dakota winters are brutal. They're brutal. Sometimes they'll get 70 inches of snow. Look, North Dakota is not an easy place to make it. I don't know how farther north. I know you're further north, but it's brutal in North Dakota. And
Similar.
yeah. And what's the name? Donner, I think I can't remember. But what he does, he'll plant 300 acres of mixes, and they're tall, and he lets them, stockpiles them. He's reduced his haying by 40 to 70% just by planting mixes and letting them stockpile. What I'm saying is sometimes we do have to hay, and that's okay. But here's what I'm telling people: when you do hay, move the haying equipment around. Don't hay that same field over and over and over, and don't cut it down. Don't cut it down to the ground, to the dirt. And because the longer recoveries, and then be able to graze that hayland. The hayland wants manure and urine. It does not want phosphorus fertilizers and salt, elemental salts. It doesn't want that. It doesn't prefer that. It wants grazing animals. And so there's a lot of things you're doing. You could be doing the right things, Kevin. I'm sure you're doing some things the right. Just be patient with yourself. And then if you ever need somebody to talk and help, just give me a call. If I don't know the answer, I'll get somebody else. Is he grazing or standing, or is he grazing it? Oh, he's grazing it standing. He doesn't swath it. He lets the animals graze it. And they get plenty of snow. Sometimes they'll get 70 inches of snow, whatever, but he lets them graze it. So he doesn't swath it. No, he just lets them graze it, Kevin, standing. And so I think there's a lot of things we can do, but I think that that no-till planting mixes and having them stockpile is a great idea. Cut his hay costs by quite a bit.
I think a lot of times too, Ray, it's just a paradigm shift. We think, like you mentioned really good, was when you're swathing and cutting it, cut it high, and then it just takes less time for it to start regrowing, and then that regrowth is what you graze. And again, too, that, like, I know we had a lot of snow here in Saskatchewan this year, but there was, like, when you look at what's there to graze and dig through the snow, there's a lot of green living yet.
Yep, you're so right, Ralph. And you know what? Another thing we do, we back ourselves into a corner. Maybe take one field and say, I'm not going to do nothing for you. I'm going to give it a Jubilee year. I'm going to give it a sabbatical rest. I'm not going to do nothing to it. Maybe just graze it and don't hay it at all. And just go get the rest of it from other. You know, one of the things I realized I'm doing rough in my place, me and a friend of mine, he's got more land than I do. I'm going to move, I'm destocking. I'm going from 135 sheep down to 50. And that's it. And I'm going to move the other 100 or 75 or more to another place. And we're going to partner up. And he's got more land. He needs more sheep. So we're going to work. But I think what I started realizing is, if we don't have diversity of income and we only do one thing, then you back yourself into a corner. In other words, I want to raise bees. I want to bring other streams of income. My teaching is one of them. My pension is another. I don't do just one thing. I bring several streams of income so that I don't push the cattle or that one thing so hard that I never give the land any time to recover or to rest. I think our biggest thing is that we don't let the land rest enough. We take too much. That's a problem.
Sometimes I think we can be overly hard on ourselves too. Like we gain some knowledge. We know what we probably should be doing, but given, you know, what we have to work with, sometimes it's imperfect and we know it. And we need to be easy on ourselves too. And to, as long as we're moving in the right direction, that's good enough.
That's it.
Yep.
That's exactly. It's a journey. I think sometimes we could be too critical on each other.
Yep.
And let me tell you, I'll tell you all my mistakes and my failures, but here's the thing. You're moving the right direction. Every time you move that cow one more time, every time you put that cover crop, the less fertilizer and chemicals, you're moving in the direction. You're doing the right thing. That's what this is about. You're going to spend the rest of your life. One more thing I would recommend, guys, is start building community to visit with each other, talk to each other. Don't do this by yourself. The one thing about the Mexicans have taught me, they have community of grazers and they work together and they have propelled themselves so far ahead. They're some of the best grazers in the world. They're turning that desert into prairie, but they build community. They build this relationships with each other. It's not a competition. That's why, and Australians are doing the same way.
That's happening here. We're starting to build some nice communities. And producers are sharing with each other, and you know, and glad to help each other, and yeah, that accelerates change.
Oh, it's huge. It's kind of like, look, some of us get 50 or 60 growing seasons in us, and the good Lord gives you that long. 50 to 60 growing seasons, maybe. Some of us may even get 40. I maybe have only 20 growing seasons left. I can't wait. So when you have 10 guys in your group and everybody does something different, you share it with the group. Now you got 10 years into 1 year. That's huge. It's huge. It makes a big difference.
Have you got a recommended reading list, Ray?
Yes, I
far
do.
Too long to list here. It probably is.
No,
but
no.
Few top three or so.
Oh yes, that book I just showed you. Let me share my screen again.
Yep.
This one is a must. This one on chaos is
right.
That one's really good. I love that, and it's the reason I love that one is because it shows you the elegance of what we're dealing with. This book is one of my favorite soil microbiology books I've read. This one is awesome, and it's cheap. And you would say, but Ray, that was back in the 30s and 60s. Oh my goodness, they were so far ahead. Far ahead.
I think you can download it for free as a PDF just online.
Yes, you can. Yep. Or you can get it free, and you can put it in your Kindle. You can put it in your.
Yep.
But I have a list that I'll give to Mike that I got him written down, and I'll share it with you guys. I'll be glad to share it with you. And books that really help me a lot. And let me get this here. Let me shut this here. Okay, yeah, let me get this screen saved. I can shut this down. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I tell you what, guys. Yeah, I'll send you a list, and then Mike can email it to everybody else, because it's the books you read really help a lot. Really helps. It helped me a bunch. Any more? One more question? Any more questions? One more.
How about so what you presented here today and this sort of beginning to make the connection between soil health and nutrient density, where do you think this is just sort of the beginning of that? Where do you think this is going over, say, the next 5-10 years?
Mike, good question. I think it's going to be the future.
Yeah.
In fact, you know, Dan Kittredge, I think you've met Dan, maybe you may know Dan, but they're working on a prototype where they can use a cell phone and buy some sensor and upload it or whatever to be able to tell. I think the future, because of our technology, is really going to be about nutrient density. Are you getting paid? Are you, and then I hope it's never controlled by any corporate beast, or where the average mom can go into the grocery store or person go into the grocery store and look and kind of say, this one's more dense than this one. It's got more phytonutrients. It's got more of this and a steak. It's going to be the future because 70% of Americans read labels. Millennials read labels, guys. 70%. They don't want GMO. They don't want Roundup. They don't want chemicals. I don't see how many times they try to push GMOs down. That battle is lost already. That people don't want their food modified, period. They want food. Let thy food be thy medicine. And General Mills and all these big companies are getting involved and they want regenerative. In fact, I just got off the phone. I got a phone. There's a person that owns Nativa, John Rulek, called me. And he was talking about a young agronomist just got hired, and there's this big lettuce. They grow a huge amount of lettuce in California. And they hired this agronomist to say, look, we want this lettuce grown regeneratively. And the agronomist going, what's that? Right. They hired him, and that's the first thing they told him, Michael. We want this regeneratively grown.
Yeah.
That's huge. It's growing like it's growing. And they told us this was going to be a fad. Forget that. It is not a fad. This is the future. Because of high costly inputs and food, people want better food.
And like you had said at the beginning, that everything's interconnected, that it all kind of connects back to the health of the land, the health of the food, the health of our water, on and on, all interconnected. So what we do on the land with agriculture has all these, potentially unintended consequences. If we can, like you say, we're not saying to quit tilling or using technology, whether it's fertilizer, chemicals, what have you, but to understand that these are powerful tools that if we use them irresponsibly do have consequences, right? So it's just
right, Mike. Chainsaw is a very powerful tool. You can cut your fingers off. It'll kill you if you're not careful with it. And that's the problem. The biggest issue is most farmers do not believe the soil's alive. They do not believe it. As I travel the whole United States, they don't get it. They think it's a growing medium. It is not. It's a living organism. And until you see it that way.
Yeah. That's sort of the top of the list of like the memes that we could help producers to understand. That would probably be top of the list, is that soil is alive. It's a living system. It's a super organism.
Yep. And the number 2 one would be all is connected. Right. All is one. Yeah. And why do you want to know that? Because that tillage event or that herbicide application, what's it going to do to the connected system? It's going to screw something up. Now, do you say not to use them? No, it's use them with wisdom that you hardly have to use them. That's what the whole intention is. And I think farmers are going to be rewarded for that. We have a guy, Rick Clark, 7,000 acres organic no-till. Organic no-till. No chemicals. He saves $800,000 a year. 800 rolling covers. He rolls covers, uses little miniature lawnmowers and all kinds of other things. But he saved a lot of money. And one of the biggest things that hurt us too, Mike, is yield. We all have a love affair with yield. But you don't understand, Ray. I got to make the yields. I said, no, yield and making money do not equate. Most people get that confused. I had a guy in Arkansas make 270 bushel under irrigated corn, made no money, zippo, nada. So inputs were too high.
Right.
So I think we're done, Mike. I think everybody's about.
Yep.
No more questions.
Someone just said,
I want to
thank
leave with this last. Yep. I want to say this last statement to you guys. Remember my beginning of my title, the butterfly effect. Everything that happens to you, it could be this little tiny thing that we do in a biological system can have an incredible tornado effect. I will tell you two things that really changed my life. One, 6th grade, my father said, you're going to go to the private school. That little tiny change in my life gave me a trajectory. Marrying my wife changed my whole trajectory. All of you guys have had little butterfly effects that have changed your trajectory for your whole life. My whole point of this butterfly effect is the system is so interconnected. Everything we do makes a difference and can have a total different outcome. It makes a difference how way we run those animals. It makes a difference if we, like Ralph was talking, if we raise that bar up high, you're not swathing it to the dirt. It makes a difference when you don't graze it to the dirt. It makes a huge difference. The little things do matter.
Yeah,
So I want to thank you guys. Right, Mike?
Yeah, like one small change, one small positive change can have like huge cascading, compounding effects. And that's a hopeful message. We can start to make small changes and then stack those small changes over time as we go down this regenerative path, and can have like overall long-term huge changes and everything from soil to profit to the quality of our food.
Amen.
Yep.
Thank you, Michael, for having me. And thank you, Ralph, and the rest of the group back there. I appreciate you guys, all of you. I was honored to be, and I hope you have a fantastic summer and spring. May you live long and prosperous and build the soil.